Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise with some trepidation, actually, to speak to this debate, because it is about real lives. And there is a young woman who is at the heart of this, and I wish to give absolute respect to her experience while being very sensitive around the legal issues in this debate. And I also feel a responsibility in this House to convey some of the anger that I'm seeing reflected in the community in response to how the debate and the discussion has been happening around this. So it is a very sensitive issue, and an issue that is reflective of much wider public concerns around, I think I could characterise as rape culture in this country, and a concern that the response by this government has been reflective of a rape culture and has actually fed the beliefs that justify and continue that culture. I'd like to just go back to some of the core points, and the Minister has finished his speech just now in talking about his apology to John Key about the Prime Minister not having the full information and how the victim is due an apology. I would like to note in this House that the victim is yet to receive an apology. The Prime Minister and the apology to him has come first before the apology to the victim. Wrong has been acknowledged, and yet that victim at the heart of this situation is yet to come up to the top of the priority list for this government. That young woman was told only the day before the defendant was leaving the country that he was not going to face charges in New Zealand. And we've heard from the Minister in response to my questions during question time that the Minister had been told by MFAT that they would apply for a waiver. And then the Minister just, I guess, assumed that that was happening. And the Minister has also told us that this is a once-in-a-decade type of event. My question is again to the Minister. You say you should have known and you did not know. My question is, why did you not ask? This is a once-in-a-decade event. They have come to you. That's your words, Minister, that you're now disputing, I guess. That sums up some of the confusion we are getting from you on this issue, because that is what you said, and it is a rare event, and they've come to you, your officials, and told you this is the process, and you didn't even bother to check in to find out what happened. If our government was putting victims at the heart of our responses, if we were putting violence prevention at the heart of our responses, that question would have been asked. And before that question was asked, I would suggest that, Minister, you would have told the officials in that initial briefing that you, because as you said in... Sorry,
just leave the Speaker out of this debate.
Mr. Speaker. The Minister would have informed the officials in that briefing that he expected them to do everything possible to keep the man here to face justice. Because, as the Minister said in question time, you had the assumption that that is what the victim wanted. Well, if you had that assumption, you should have called the Minister should have called the department on taking every means possible to make sure that happened, and the Minister should have followed up a simple phone call. So, what happened with that? How did that conversation go with the High Commission? Are they happy to waiver it or not? I think is the least that this country could expect in terms of putting victims at the heart of our processes, rather than just providing lip service to it. I would also like to note that in this situation, and because that didn't happen, This young woman has been told by the police that she may well have to go to Malaysia to face and provide her evidence. That's the information she's been given by the police in New Zealand. And we know how tough our court system here is here in New Zealand. We know how brutal a process it is to give evidence in these cases. Everyone in this house knows that. Imagine putting ourselves into her place of having to go through what we can only assume is a comparable system in another country, in another cultural context, with other language involved, and no family support, not being able to go home at night and put on the kettle and have a cup of tea and try and cope with what you've been through. If we were putting victims at the heart of our processes, there's no way we would just fob this off as a side issue, that this may be what is required of this young woman, because that is not doing justice to our supposed commitment to survivors or victims of sexual violence. And I would now just like to take this wider, because I do know that there is some quite deep concerns about some patterns that are arising. And every country in the world is struggling to get on top of violence against women and children. It is a global problem, and we have to take it seriously, and we need a whole of government response if we are going to do it. And in New Zealand, we are hearing today, interestingly enough, we did hear last week from the Minister of Justice that it was going to be a few weeks before she announced her family violence initiatives. Interesting to see it in the House today while we were asking these questions and having been brought forward. But I'm not, well, that's interesting. We were told it was going to be later, Minister, and it is interesting. Yes, we were. So we're now seeing this happening today while these questions are coming up. It's interesting. And yet the public, while the government is saying this is a core priority for them, and yet just in the last short period we have seen a minister resign because he had interfered in behalf of an abuser by calling the police on behalf of somebody accused of domestic violence. And now we are seeing a minister who says he should have known but did not know and never thought to ask around the situation of a victim of domestic violence in a diplomatic situation. And we've also seen the case in the Ministry of Primary Industries, where a senior director has been appointed to a position with a history of having been disciplined for sexual offending without there having been any notice given to the staff, without there having been any necessarily information around whether that person appointed to that position had done any kind of personal development work to be able to change their values and behaviours to make them safe in that workplace, considering the previous offences had happened within a work context. So we are seeing this pattern of the government on one hand saying we take this seriously, and yet across ministries we are seeing the core leadership missing the fundamental point and not connecting the dots, that unless we actually make this a core priority in all of our work, then we are not going to start reducing the violence. And in fact we will be, and we are, creating the environment and the culture that enables it to feed and grow. Unless victims know that they will be listened to and their needs are respected and put first in all of our systems, then it's difficult to come forward. It's difficult to get justice. And I think this government needs to be held account for the choices it makes, and whether they see this as a whole government problem or just a one-off incident that the government does or the minister doesn't even need to follow up on.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to also express our grave concern about how this whole matter has been handled. Mr. Speaker, a very serious crime